Welcome, everybody. I'm Jodi Rudoren. I'm the editor-in-chief for The Forward. We are going to start with some music tonight. Rabbi Sandra Lawson is going to bring us in to the event as people roll in. So sit back. You can let us know in the chat where you are calling in from and your connection to The Forward or to any of our speakers, but I'm going to let Sandra bring us in.
Well, I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. Well, I woke up this morning with my mind and it was stayed on freedom. Well, I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Well, sitting and talking with my mind stayed on freedom. Well, sitting and talking with my mind stayed on freedom. Well, singing and talking with my mind stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Well, singing and praying with my mind and it was stayed on freedom. Well, singing and praying with my mind and it was stayed on freedom. Well, singing and praying with my mind and it was stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Yes, I woke up this morning with my mind and it was stayed on freedom. Well, woke up this morning with my mind and it was stayed on freedom. Well, woke up this morning with my mind and it was stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. I think perfect for Juneteenth.
Perfect. Exactly, for Juneteenth. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I know some people are still rolling in. Thank you, Rabbi Sandra Lawson, for that great opening to get us in the mood to talk about Juneteenth and civil rights and anti-racism. And it's great to see people from just all over the country and world coming in. And I see Forward supporters. And thank you again for joining us. So this is the third year that the three of us have come together to talk about Juneteenth and the state of race and racism and racial justice across the Jewish world. So thank you both for joining us. Just do brief introductions and then we'll get into it. Rabbi Sandra Lawson, who in addition to having a beautiful voice and playing the guitar so beautifully, is the Reconstructing Judaism's Chief Diversity Officer. I think her actual title is Director of some long list of things. She was ordained by the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College in 2018. Some people know her as the Twitter rabbi or the TikTok rabbi. She's got 50,000 or more social media followers. And she was one of the first queer African-American and also vegan rabbis out there. And one of her missions that she just embodies every day is changing our perception of what a rabbi looks and sounds and functions like. And we'll talk more about that. Rabbi Sandra had been just in her new job, maybe just for a little bit a year ago when we met. Before that, she was a chaplain at Elon University in North Carolina, and she's from St. Louis and grew up in a military family, which I think is actually as unusual among American rabbis as some of the other characteristics too. Rabbi Sandra also is now a member of our Forward Association, which is our governing board. So thank you for being part of our Forward family. And then we have Tema Smith, who is our Canadian friend calling from Toronto. Tema has been a longtime contributor to the Forward's opinion section, and she is also in a new role since we last met. She's now the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League's Director of Jewish Outreach and Partnerships. Tema previously worked at 18 Doors, which is the leading interfaith family organization. And before that, she spent many years working in synagogues as a synagogue professional. She is also involved with the Nexus Task Force, which is looking at the connections between anti-Semitism and Israel. And just maybe like a month ago, she won a big, huge award from JPRO, the Jewish Professional Organization. She won the Young Professional Award. So congratulations, Tema, on that. And welcome to all of you. As I think, Aaron, just a couple of tachlis things in the beginning. First of all, you will get a video of this event in your email, so do not fret. You can watch it over and over again. You can send it to your friends. You can post it on your social media accounts, and that'll come to you tomorrow. Also, we love using the chat. You are welcome to make comments in the chat, share articles that are relevant, anything you want in the chat. But if you have a question that you want me to ask Tema and Sandra, or if you want to ask me anything, you should use the Q&A button, which is probably right next to the chat button or near the chat button. And that's where we're going to collect questions, because as you can see already, the chat gets filled up and rolls by. And hello, Alice Kurtz from right down the street in Montclair. I'm also in Montclair, capital of the universe, and welcome. So it is our third year. We spun this event up pretty quickly after the murder of George Floyd in 2020, as really the world and also the Jewish world was being convulsed by horror and outrage and commitments to anti-racism. And then we came back together a year ago to sort of check in and see how all that had gone. And now we're 2 years on, and I hope we'll do this forever. But I'm going to start by asking each of you to kind of give us your assessment on how we are doing on racism, racial justice across Jewish organizations, across the Jewish world. We can not, you don't have to use letter grades or number grades. You can use those elementary school, descriptors, because we're all about the nuance here. And I'd love you to each just kind of give me your impressions of where are we? How's it going? How are we doing? Pros and cons. And why don't we start with you, Tema, since Sandra already sang us in a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So, wow, so much to say. It's wild to think we've been doing this for, this will be the third time. And I'm just thinking about the fact that our first one was cobbled together, as you said, very soon after George Floyd's murder. Our second one was right around the verdict that made it not, that made it like it was clearly a murder after that verdict. And this year, I think we're coming together at a time where we're sort of still in the reverberations of what was really sort of a seismic shift. And also, the topic of race and racism is still so topical inside the Jewish community. We were all just, as we were coming together today, I know the three of us were sort of reminiscing a little bit and thinking about the fact that, wow, the Jewish community is shifting. And it's shifting rapidly. And you can see it everywhere. One thing that I keep thinking of is that last year I pulled together a panel when I was still working at 18 Doors that was for Jewish professionals, and it was something like what Jewish professionals need to know about racism to work with interfaith families. And it was like the anti-Black racism edition. It was meant to be a series, then I left the job. So it is what it is. But without trying very hard, I put together a roundtable of 5 Black Jewish professionals, all from interfaith families, which was actually the accident. But the fact that without actually putting in much effort, I think back fondly to J-Pro. I know that there was just an op-ed in the Forward a couple days ago where almost every single plenary had a Jew of color represented. And the topic, and it wasn't tokenistic, and the topic of Jewish equity, diversity, and inclusion was just so interwoven, and still the conversations about race and racism and all of the work that we still need to do was there. So, I mean, I'm not going to give letter grades. I don't even think I'm going to give an assessment, because I think, equity is always a work in progress. And really the success is in the fact that progress is happening. And it can happen fast, it can happen slow. In some sections of the Jewish community, it's happening fast, in others, it's happening slow. But the reality is that we are moving forward. And that, to me, I've been in this space for a long time now. the fact that the Jewish community that I see sort of out in front of me looks so different than the one that I came into as a professional in 2009, 2008, something like that. Just says everything in my mind that we need to know right now about the direction that we're going. And it is very exciting.
I love how young you are, Tema, that 2008, 2009 seems like a really long time in the space, but that's great. I have to say, I'm really struck to hear, and I appreciate the sort of optimism and positive spin. Like, I remember very clearly those first weeks after George Floyd and when we were first here. And one of the things that both of you said, and that other professionals, Jewish professionals who are Black and Jewish or other Jews of color said, was how few people there were that were like the go-to people to be on every panel or write everything. And one of the real issues was a sense of like deep exhaustion for all that you were being asked to do. And on the one hand, it felt like this amazing like moment where everybody was very, very interested, and yet it felt like a lot to carry. And so it's really exciting to hear just the anecdotal examples of the ways in which that has, there's been an expanded stage and more people to call on. So Sandra, how about you?
To be clear, it's still exhausting. However, I'm still optimistic.
And we appreciate that you both contribute so much to us in the forward and are available to us. But so talk to us, Rabbi Sandra, about where's your assessment, the good, the bad, the yet to get there.
Yeah, I think, I'm just going to begin where you both left off. That year, right after Breonna Taylor and Amuna Bree and George Floyd, and I put them together like that because without one, if it had just been George Floyd, we probably would not be here. But the three of them in close proximity to each other really changed it. But I was just thinking that first year, Tim and I were on so many Zoom calls together, and at that time, I think there were not a lot of folks that the larger Jewish community knew of, that the larger Jewish community felt comfortable with, and Tema and I were both on that list for a variety of reasons, to sort of help the Jewish community explain this moment in time. So I can't give a letter grade, and there's definitely nuance. We are definitely on this moving train, slow, maybe turtle, I don't know. There's lots of progress. And sometimes we take a few steps forward and sometimes we take a few steps back. I think at first, when I was still at Elon, I don't think any progressive major Jewish organization that I can recall had any Jews of color on senior staff. And I remember looking at that and being so disappointed. And these were organizations that had devoted time to, and were not walking their talk. And that has a lot to do with how I landed back home in the Reconstructionist movement. Because I felt like if I was going to help make change, I needed to do it in a place that I felt comfortable, which is I'm a product of the Reconstructionist movement. So, we have definitely gotten better. I mean, not as many people think Black Lives Matter is anti-Semitic, although I'm sure there's still some people out there that think that. I want to believe that Tim and I had a lot to do with changing people's hearts and minds on that, but there's still some people that are leery of that and don't understand what it means. But we still have a long way to go. And one of the things that I do in my role is this work is never ending. I mean, I wish I could say it had an end point, but it's a constant work to dismantle this system that has existed, longer than any of us have been alive, as long as, at least in my vantage point, as long as this continent has existed with white people or Europeans running it.
Yeah, I mean, it really resonates with me what you said about the work is, never ending. I think I told you this before, Sandra, but we sat down, our executive team sat down at the beginning of the year to sort of look at our 2021 strategic priorities and went through a long list of our projects and just to, which ones had we accomplished and what was left to do. And it was super interesting because in our diversity, equity, inclusion section, we had actually done all the things. And we felt that we hadn't like moved enough. You know, we was some things we were like, well, we didn't get to do that. We didn't get the funding, or we ran out of time. In the DEI section, it was like, we did all the things and we still felt like, you know, we're at the bottom of a mountain or in the middle of a mountain. And that's, I think I spoke to you about this and you said, yeah, that's actually how this work is.
Yeah.
You check them off, but you don't really check it off. You know, you just kind of dig in a little deeper. And I'm struck by, I'm going to share in the chat this piece that Alana Kaufman of the Jews of Color Initiative wrote for us. I think it was like 3 months ago or something, which was, you know, I think a very heartfelt and in some ways wrenching piece that said, you know, I have been doing this and plotting away and talking to every organization for 10 years. And it's a lot of well-meaning, well-intentioned people who I believe them when they say they care, and it's not changing. It's not changing fast enough. Yeah. So maybe talk a little bit about some of that work you see that we really have to get to now, this year, right now.
Well, so depends on where you want to start. So, you know, I really think it's important that we get a critical mass of clergy, of Jewish clergy of color. And I say that from a conversation I had. It wasn't just her and I mean, I'm a huge B'nai Lappi fan, but she was talking to a few clergy. And, you know,
B'nai Lappi is a rabbi who runs a queer yeshiva in Chicago. And
and so she realized that until there was a critical mass of queer people who understood Talmud, things weren't going to change. And now you don't need to be a queer person to study Talmud at Sfara. Many people study there, and it's a well-respected yeshiva for studying Talmud. But until there are a sizable number of Jews of clergy right now, and we need more. And I think that is going to do a lot more to changing people's perceptions. And we need more clergy. We need to break down barriers that were created for a system that wasn't designed for us. That does not mean we don't belong. And we need to make sure that we set up systems where people of color not just come in, but can actually thrive. And then be successful rabbis and cantors or kohanet or whatever. And we just need to get out of people's way and let them be the clergy person that they need to be. Now, with that, when I was coming up, the only option for leadership that I saw was being a rabbi. But today we do have a sizable number of Jews of color in nonprofits and running nonprofits. And I think that's awesome. And if that had existed today, I would still be a rabbi, but I would have had options.
Yeah. Are you seeing I know you know probably more about Reconstruction, the rabbinical college there, than the other movements, but what do you know about how the pipeline's changing and the diversity?
Oh God, yeah. Like I don't know actual numbers of other movements, but I mean the JTS just graduated its first Black rabbi, Kendall Pickney, and who's awesome. And then I know that there's a sizable number of rabbinical students in the HUC system, and there's more coming. We have the Reconstructionist movement currently has 3 rabbinical students of color. To my knowledge, 2 more are coming in. Incredibly talented, wonderful, talented people. And actually, I'm on the admissions committee sometimes. And this week, there's an additional person of color that's applying in the fall. So that might mean 3 students of color. And I'm pretty sure, I think they're all Black too.
And then the class is not that big, right? It's like we're talking about.
I actually don't know how big this incoming class is, but we don't have we don't have huge classes. Like for us, a huge class is like 14 people.
Right. So 3 is a significant number out of.
Yeah, but there's more. I mean, there's three out of however many students come in. Yeah, it's definitely, it's enough to change the culture.
Tema, when I do appreciate that you started us off with the positive changes, but what do you see as the things that you feel we really need to get to quicker, sooner, better?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot that and I try to maintain optimism because optimism for me is a little bit of a survival mechanism from time to time. There's still a lot in the community that I think tries to pit fighting anti-Semitism and fighting racism in ways that put Jews of color in the middle, and ask Jews of color to pick sides in very I'll speak personally in like extraordinarily personally uncomfortable ways, where I have been told that, you know, I clearly, prefer my Black side to my Jewish side, like just like wild. Yes, I have spent my career working in the Jewish community because that is not the community that I like, like just very strange things like that. And the sad thing with it is that when I think this, to me, this is very emblematic of what it means to walk into a system that isn't quite understanding your existence yet in some ways.
Right.
Is that when that happens, people are like, well, that's not true. You work in the Jewish community, as if that like sort of divide, as if I'm not walking in fighting anti-Semitism and anti-Black racism all the time, as if I can parse out these different pieces of what I do. And that to me, like just the inability to sort of say both things at the same time in many cases, or even people who say like we need to fight both at the same time, still doesn't quite grasp the fact that there are a significant and growing number of people who live at the intersection of the two things. And it's not like one day we fight racism and one day we fight anti-Semitism. We are always doing both, and doing both in our existence. And I think, when I think about, and that's personally challenging and exhausting, right? It's being asked to put aside challenges that I and my family face in order to fight other challenges that I and my family face, without recognizing and asking us to bracket it in ways for the quote good of the Jews, right? And that's the part that for me really stings, is this sort of lack of recognition that actually what's for the good of the Jews is a thing that is, I'm Black and Jewish, right? Like that's
Right.
for the good of the Jews here. And so that sort of bracketing that happens, and that's still, as much as, one thing that I've said frequently is that the Jewish community, and this is a place where I think when we talk about the shift happening, I'm starting to see more and more, but the Jewish community historically and contemporaneously has done a great job showing up for racial justice causes, right? Whether it's, voting rights historically or now, et cetera, et cetera. But when it comes to actually looking at our own house, sometimes we get very defensive, as if the work that we do out there precludes, let's just say microaggressions, that's an easy one, microaggressions from happening inside. And some of them, and then I think also like the last piece I'll say, I've gone on for a while here, the last piece I'll say is that I think we're still struggling with tokenization, where people are responding to recognizing we need to do more by patronizing and tokenizing behavior, of sort of putting Jews of color on a pedestal because of their race, rather than their contributions, rather than how they want to be approached. One of the things I've heard people say many times, and I agree with, is that we'll know that like we've come a long way when instead of Jews of color being approached to talk about race and racism, we're approached to teach Torah in quote white Jewish spaces. And there are those of us who are here to talk about race and racism, right? Like I'm not sort of saying this is an example of that. Sandra and I both do this work. But for many people, I hear that they're synagogue professionals and they're called upon to talk about racism, and they're just like, I just want to come to Shabbat services, right? And that's where we need to sort of push the needle a little bit. And there's a lot of that also goes on.
I just want to add go ahead.
No, I just want to say there's a couple things in the chat, people asking some technical questions. Aaron or Jackie, if you can help people with copying and pasting or clicking on the resources. We will also send the links out by email tomorrow for people, so you can follow up there. No, go ahead, Sandra, jump in.
Just to echo
there's so much to pick up on what Tema said.
Yeah, no, just to echo that, like part of the, like when I first arrived at Reconstructing Judaism as this new role, I would say to our folks, we're doing a pretty good job of, say, showing up at the immigration rally or showing up at the prisons or supporting the Black minister down the street. Where we are failing is the internal work. And in some of my, conversations with some of my colleagues who some were concerned that I wasn't going to like lift up the work they were doing. And I said, no, I said, yeah, I keep doing what you're doing. And what happens if I come in your house? What happens if I show up in your synagogue? What happens if I come in just not as rabbi? What happens if I talk to the Jews of color in your community? That is the hard work. That work of that internal work, that means looking at ourselves, looking at our own communities, looking at our houses, is this non-sexy work that is not going to get you on the cover of the Forward or the New York Times. That's the real work. And because it's hard and not as easy, people don't want to do it. And also the sort of challenging of, where to start. And then it also means confronting one's own racism. And a lot of this is sort of fostered by guilt and shame, shame of, shame of either not realizing the racism had ended, or shame, that you did realize that, but you haven't done anything, and you just feel guilty about it. So you don't do anything. And that's, I've also helped, I've worked with our congregational arm to start this process of creating an internal assessment for congregations, for the leaders to do the work, facilitated by clergy, so they can begin the conversation, and hopefully that will trickle down into what happens when people come in. And even though I still think we are getting better, I still on one hand, I get calls from, I talk to people about the good work we're doing, and I also still get calls from Jews of color who still do not feel welcome. And not just Jews of color. I say Jews of color because because I am a Jew of color, but I do believe if we can fix this, or at least get this better, this also helps trans people. This also helps other people with marginalized identities, because even though we are further along on the homophobia front, the trans front, there are still queer people who don't see themselves in our communities.
So, Rabbi Sandra, I want to dig in there a little bit more, and then we're going to circle back to some of the other things Tema brought up. But because we did an article about this, and that you led what's right now a pilot, but it's going to be expanding, a sort of synagogue study project or survey project with Reconstructionist synagogues, and like totally top view. What you said to me that was, I thought, really intriguing. I mean, so you start with this is a movement that's very interested in this issue and topic, and has, created this executive role for you. I think most Reconstructionist congregations, have been in the work, in the conversation. And when you did this survey, I think you said you had started with 4 synagogues, right? Deep reflections. And the very top view you said to me was the people who think they're doing really great aren't doing so great, and the people who think they're really nowhere are actually doing more, which is part of that. It's a long mountain, right? But so tell us a little bit about what surprised you in that beginning of that work with the synagogues.
So I'll take a step back. When I took this role, I had 2 things that I insisted on. One, I didn't want to leave North Carolina, so I'm in North Carolina. And the other one is, I said, I want to find a way to assess our congregations on our racial justice work and how it aligns with our strategic plan. We have a wonderful new strategic plan that centers this work, to help people understand this work is part of a movement. A movement is driving this. And I didn't know how I was going to do that. And so I spent several months talking to Jewish clergy who have been doing this work since before it was cool to do this work. I'm just going to drop some names, like, Ellen Littman and Susan Talvey in St. Louis, and Joshua Lesser in Atlanta, Mordecai Kaplan, Mordecai Liebling, and those are a few, and I know I'm leaving off some names, but I talked to anybody who would talk, and I said, what did you guys do? And I took the best, including my counterpart over at the URJ. I talked to Yolanda and her team. I took the best of what people were doing, tweaked it a little bit to work, and also tried to make it as manageable as possible. So what surprised me is that people were really, really excited. Even some of the people who gave me some of the most pushback were really excited to do this work. Many of them admitted that once they got into it, it wasn't nearly as hard as they thought it was going to be. that what this one guy, bless his heart, he was like, he told everybody it's not that hard. You can do it, you can do it. And it also, another thing that surprised me, and there's so many, I mean, I have tons and tons of notes because I am a researcher before I was a rabbi, um, that they now have shared language on this stuff. They know where they all are on this issue. They know they have a starting point. Instead of assuming that people are in one place and people are starting, they have a baseline. And they've all walked through their properties and with fresh eyes to see the parts that they maybe where they can improve on. And so this is like dipping your little pinky toe nail in the water. This is not like you're not even a whole foot. This is the beginning process of trying to change the culture. And now with those four congregations, hopefully we can help them continue to move through this. And we actually now have better information to provide resources. That's another thing. If a congregation were to call Thriving Communities, which is the congregational arm, asking for help, they would get help, but they would be less clear on what exactly the person needs they'd have to do a lot of conversation, a lot of stuff. But now they can be able to take this information and be able to give the congregations resources they can actually use and not necessarily what they think they want. Like if a congregation has done the assessment and, has, leadership of color on their board, I don't need to just give them reading materials. It might be something, I mean, reading materials are always great, but we can continue moving them forward on this work.
Thank you. We have a bunch of good questions already, so I'm going to just ask a couple more myself, and then we'll get to those. And I want to go back to what Tema was talking about. The way you said it, Tema, was that often unfortunately, we have too much bad news around to remind us of racism and of anti-Semitism. And you were talking about how the ways in which sometimes people ask you to sort of divide your identity and which half of you is. And it's interesting because I'm thinking of two things as you say that. One is our editor at large, Robin Washington, wrote a piece about, he talks about himself being 100% both, 100% Black and 100% Jewish. This idea that you can kind of code switch or whatever. I guess you can code switch, but you're always your full self. And then the other thing is that it's not just about asking you to be one or the other, but there is this kind of erasure, right? That's part of it, right? It's this erasure. So I just would invite each of you to talk about how that has played out. We have two big phenomenon going on, right? And we have various indications from the ADL, from police departments of rising anti-Semitism. We have ongoing big picture conversations about structural racism. And then also we have violence. We had the Buffalo massacre of 10 Black people with a white supremacist who purposely picked a heavily Black neighborhood as close to him as he could, and whose screed, whose justification, whose whatever, the conspiracy theory he subscribed to, the Great Replacement theory is a racist and anti-Semitic theory, or a theory very much rooted in anti-Semitic tropes, kind of at its core. So I guess I wonder if you can both talk a little bit about how that shooting and other events are playing out in the Black and Jewish communities, or in the Jewish community, and how it affects you as Black Jews. Discuss. That's not really a question. I don't know. Jump in wherever you like, but I think this is really present. I mean, it's happening now.
Yeah, the Buffalo shooting, I think, for me was a great moment. So I'm constantly, for myself, because of the work that I do, trying to parse my own emotions and my own reactions, and try to understand what I'm reacting to and why and how. And the Buffalo shooting for me was a very clarifying moment. And I think for me, one of the things, because it was an unequivocally anti-Semitic and anti-Black racist attack, where the people who died were Black, and died because of this conspiracy of Jewish power and control, right? And so that to me was, just could have provided a moment of significant rupture, and thankfully did not. But what I noticed was some of the time when the Jewish community was engaging with it, it was almost intellectual. It was, we need to fight the Great Replacement theory because it's a conspiracy theory, and like reference after reference after reference to Tree of Life, which of course the Tree of Life, the murderer at Tree of Life, terrorist at Tree of Life, also espoused this Great Replacement theory. Also, the guy at the Walmart in El Paso, like all of these, this is like a unifying white nationalist theory here. And I was on a call with Eric Ward yesterday, who talks very persuasively about anti-Semitism as the core ideology, the core animating ideology. But when you're in calls, recognizing and sort of trying to recognize and parse and figure out Jewish communal response to Buffalo and so on and so forth, and it's like intellectualized, it erases the fact that for some people in our Jewish community, we were having a very significant trauma response, the same way that I'm sure everyone who is on this call who is Jewish can remember the feeling of finding out about the Tree of Life massacre, right? And that was how we were feeling. And so it's very hard to maintain this sort of distance of like, well, here's how we're going to respond. And at the same time, we're asked to, right? Because we're showing up to do this work as Jews in that moment. And so those are some of the pieces that I find personally emotionally challenging. And I, thankfully have a community now of Jews of color who I can have that conversation with in ways that I think help move the conversation forward, and also give me language and tools to say, hey, I had an emotional response to this because I felt like I was being asked to bracket the fact that like my community was just murdered. And so those are some of those challenges. And so even when we're naming the racism and we're naming the fact that it was an attack on the Black community done in the name of anti-Semitism, we're forgetting that it was still an attack on people who like on the sort of people who look like people in the Jewish community.
Yeah.
It's the difference between like theoretically talking about race and racism and actually living race and racism, and how the language comes off, and I had a staff meeting, and I couldn't pinpoint what was happening, and I was like, this language just sounds very depressing to me. It was something else, and it was because white people were trying to figure out ways to talk race and about race and or racism, and some of the language to me just sounded depressing, and I'm like, this is my life experience, and can you find a way to like not make it sound bad? But I also understood who the audience was for. When this happened in Buffalo, my brain went to before Pittsburgh. You can remember there was this dude who tried to go to a church, doors were locked, and he went in a parking lot and killed people, Black people, looking for Black people. And then a few weeks later, Pittsburgh happened. And I also think there was something in the middle that is etched in my brain because I was a brand new rabbi, and was asked to speak about it, and I had to call Elise Wechterman and said Elise Wechterman is the executive director of our RA, and I was like, reporters are calling me, I don't really know what to say. And she said, you don't have to talk to them. But I also had students who needed me, and so I had to like talk about that. But I knew, I said, here, this is happening again. This is where we are. And Buffalo happened, and then the church that for some reason nobody wants to cover, and then those children, I have been crying endlessly, and I don't understand the lack of empathy. I mean, seriously, this is one of the things that racism does, is that our white supremacy culture does, is it erases empathy for the other. And the fact that you can listen to people talk about you know, this police officer in Buffalo who, you know, fought and he was killed, and this grandmother who was just going to buy her groceries, and these children, you know, and I heard the story that like these children now, because of the way they are trained to deal with mass shootings, they know someone in their class could be a mass shooter who's also learning the same things that they are learning. How scary is that? And people can still talk politics. You know, I mean, I hope these senators are coming together to think of something, but I don't understand like how you can just people can just continue to talk about politics, go straight to holding on to whatever ideas that they have about what the Second Amendment says, um, and not talk about the real pain, the real loss that is actually happening. And this is an epidemic. And we have to do something. I don't claim to know the answers, but I elect people who are supposed to be working on this. Um, and I don't understand. I don't understand how people can not have their heartstrings. And then one more thing, like I was talking back to Elise Wechterman, we were talking, and one of the things that she said, and please forgive me if Lisa if I'm getting this wrong, but like she was talking to some people and they were like, well, as a parent, I sympathize with you. And she's like, what about as a human? I don't even have children. And I can understand how I can't watch this without crying. And I don't understand how other people can do this and still just talk politics as if, and the other thing too is there's people are sadly becoming numb to all this violence.
Yeah.
This is not normal. This is not how we're supposed to be.
Not
But
normal.
I will say this is part of the history of our country. This is part of the culture of our country. It's just that white people are experiencing it when other groups have long experienced it.
I just said that. So we are in a low place. I'm going to turn it a little bit.
Remember when we started with optimism?
Wow. Okay. And we really do have a lot of good questions, but I want to ask you first. Let's get back to, so it's June 13th. We decided to do this event earlier this year. So tell us a little bit about how you're thinking about the holiday of Juneteenth. The second year it'll be a federal holiday. Although some organizations seem to have it, we don't seem to be fully on the same page about whether you're supposed to take Friday or Monday off when it's on a Sunday, but that's neither here nor there. Let's start with Tema. Both, what are you planning on doing on Juneteenth, but also like, how are you thinking about it? And let's try to keep it a little short because I want to get to some of these other questions.
So I have a funny relationship to Juneteenth, the holiday, both as living in Canada, but also because my Black family, our lineage is Caribbean. So our family was freed decades before American Black folks were freed. So I have kind of, in some ways, I'm more of a distant observer of the holiday, and at the same time I'm really excited that ADL is we just announced today a really exciting partnership with the National Urban League, and we will be doing a webinar that I can't wait to attend on Friday, really diving into some of these topics of Black Jewish relations and things like that. So that we're observing Juneteenth on Monday as our sort of federal day off. And as I always do when it comes to Juneteenth, I try to read Black writers. So I've got some James Baldwin lined up. I think I said the same thing last year because any day to read Baldwin is a good day in my books. And I bought more Baldwin since last year. So I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to, lie in my hammock and read some James Baldwin.
Rabbi Sandra.
So myself, rabbinical student, Dr. Kawak Baruch Frazier, are going to go to Atlanta to partner with the Atlanta Jews of Color Council, and also partner with the local rabbi, Joshua Lesser. And we hope to have a ruach-filled, spiritually uplifting Friday night Shabbat service that's about liberation and freedom. And somebody pointed this out to me. I don't know if it's true, but it would be cool if it's true. This is the only Jewish Juneteenth event completely organized by Black Jews. And it might be the first one ever. I mean, there are Jewish Juneteenth events, but this is the what I was told was the only one organized by Jews of color, and we've got significant amount of support, which I'm really grateful for.
And one of the things you told me about that event, and I'm going to put the link into the chat right now for people to sign up for the event, but you just said half of it, right? It's organized by Jews of color, but also the Kabbalah Shabbat is going to be entirely led by Jews of color, right? So part of this, and this is about what you do every day, which is showing people, not telling them, but showing them what it looks like, right? What Black Jewish leadership looks like.
Yeah, I think, I mean, part of it when I started this, so I have a nonprofit that I run called Kol HaPanim, which is all faces, and part of it is to normalize people of color leading services. I mean, that's one of the by the time you were done with rabbinical school, like that's one of the easiest things to do is lead services. And you know, I have led services and I have been done, and people have said to me, wow, that was a regular service. And I'm like, I'm not, and I'm thinking in my mind, I'm not sure what you thought I was going to do. And I've led services in Reform synagogues and conservative synagogues and non-denominational and Reconstructionist ones. But I want people to see people of color leading. And so, you know, having a future rabbi and myself leading with Joshua Lesser and working and having Black leaders in Atlanta also lead stuff normalizes Black people leading.
Yeah. And women as well, but yes.
Oh yeah,
I put the wrong link in. Here's the right link to the event. Sorry about that. No, and you know, definitely don't ask the Black rabbi after she's done, you know, where she learned Hebrew, right? Or whatever. Okay, so I want to go to some of these really good questions. Marcia Fiedler, asks if you could expand on Black Lives Matter not being anti-Semitic, and ask also if you have any sources for people to read later. So this has been, you know, an ongoing conversation, right? Is the how, I mean, well, I'll just leave it at that.
So I'm going to say this.
Wait, I want to combine with another question I saw, which is, sorry, let me find it. It was really about the fact that that in general over history, there's been, you know, a lot of good cooperation. Nancy Brody, sometimes I feel that throughout history, African Americans and Jews tended to be pinned against each other. I'm interested in hearing the panelists' view on the history of this and how they feel we can combat that and work together. So, and this question about anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism in the Black Lives Matter movement, I think is the modern question here, right?
Well, so the two different things. So you said anti-Semitism, then you said anti-Zionism. So I'm going to hold that for a second, and I'm going to be quick. And Tema can jump in when you're ready, because you know, a lot of what I say, I the first time I heard you say, I was like, oh, makes more sense. Oh damn it, I already forgot. The second one, the second question you asked. So I know. So white supremacy, I will say, racism functions in isolation, and white supremacy culture, the DNA of white supremacy culture pits marginalized groups against each other, because if marginalized groups are fighting, you know, people who have power can stay in power. The next thing I'll say is, Tim and I have been talking about Black Lives Matter not being anti-Semitic for a long time. There is a lot of information on this. I'm going to flip this because, one, we don't have a lot of time, but the lack of empathy that I was talking about, the person who asked the question, either for yourself or other people, what is it about the phrase Black Lives Matter that makes some white Jews think it's anti-Semitic, when it really is a slogan, a hashtag that says, my life matters. Or you can say, my life matters too. And two Jews standing up here, two Jews of color standing up here saying that Black Lives Matter, and we support that statement. I don't understand why people still think it's anti-Semitic. It is rooted in racism. To believe that Black Lives Matter is anti-Semitic is rooted in racism.
Yeah, and I think, there's been a lot written on sort of the history and the context, and I echo everything that that Sandra just said. But just very, very, very briefly, there's a very so Black Lives Matter as a movement is a decentralized movement. There is an organization called that calls it, there are two. There's Black Lives Matter and there's the movement for Black Lives. So I just saw BLM supported BDS. No, that was the movement for Black Lives, which had some Black Lives Matter groups as part of it, as well as other social justice groups. I am 100% not somebody to minimize anti-Semitism coming from the left. Given that as somebody who spends time in progressive space, I live it and deal with it and try to educate against it all the time. And at the same time, there has been a lot of misinformation about Black Lives Matter as a movement that is being spread exactly in service of dividing our communities. This isn't to say that there aren't Black Lives Matter chapters that have espoused anti-Semitism or Black Lives Matter leaders, but the reality is Black Lives Matter as a statement pre-exists the Black Lives Matter movement. These are some of the things that are complicated, is when a lot of us are saying Black Lives Matter, we literally are just saying our lives matter. And it's not actually signing on. I think one thing also to remember is that the Jewish community is a highly organized and highly centralized community. Other marginalized groups don't necessarily function in the same way. And so when we are talking about that, and when we are talking about some of these pieces, I think we have to remember that we tend to approach communities as monoliths that are not, the same way that I think we would hope that people don't approach the Jewish community as a monolith. What I just want to sort of re-echo what Sandra said there, one of the things that is challenging for me, and talking about sort of that invisibilizing, like I spoke about earlier, is that almost every time I do a talk about racism in Jewish spaces, the question of, is Black Lives Matter anti-Semitic, comes up, whether I mention Black Lives Matter or not. And so what that is doing, and this isn't necessarily the case here because Sandra brought it up, but what I often see is it comes up as if I have to explain something anti-Semitic that somebody Black said, because I am also, I am also somebody who is Black. And the same way that I hope that, you react when people hold all Jews accountable for what one Jew does. I hope that we can spend that time and take a step back and reflect on that. And like, I've been asked to disavow Louis Farrakhan in Jewish spaces before, as if me, a progressive mixed race Jewish woman, somehow would be sympathetic to his extremist Black nationalist, misogynistic, homophobic, wildly anti-Semitic movement. Like, that's insane.
Yeah. So I want to just close the loop on this and then get on to a couple other questions, but yeah. You came close to answering this, Tema, but I think I want to just clarify. So you talked about the Movement for Black Lives as a separate organization from the broader decentralized Black Lives Matter movement, or as a subset. And there was something in the Movement for Black Lives Charter, I think in 2016, regarding BDS, but I believe it was removed. So I think there certainly are different members of Black Lives Matter and perhaps chapters or set member organizations who may have positions that support BDS, but there is not some umbrella BDS supporting position across this movement. And I believe that the most publicized version of that has been changed. Is that your understanding as well? Just so, okay, great. Let's move on from there.
I just want to say one thing, just
sure, go ahead, Sandra.
Anti-Semitism exists on the left and right. It is not a political thing. I mean, it's not like one group holds it more than the other, but they're very different. On the right, political right, anti-Semitism is core to the belief system of extreme right movements. The left, just there's more nuance to this. but it is not central, it's not core, and can often be corrected with education. And that's what happened with the platform movement for Black Lives.
Thank you for that. So there are a few different questions in here that I think all have a little bit of an undercurrent connecting them. So if you'll indulge me. So Richard Fulton talks about having spent a wonderful Shabbat with the Black Hebrew congregation in Philadelphia. And he's wondering what are the lines of communication and challenges related to those communities, given that they are not viewed as normative Jews under a traditional standard. So that's one of the questions. Another question, actually from the same guy, Richard, thank you. He talked about having a guest speaker at his modern Orthodox community from a Black Orthodox rabbi from Muncie. He was very moved by this. So he's wondering about lines of communication between Orthodox Jews of color and those in other streams. And then I think there's another question, from Glenn Warshaw, who asks, what can those who are conservative politically do to fight racism? That's a little bit of a different question, but I wanted to throw them all together and maybe start with the question of the streams and how much Black Jews, Black Israelites, Black Orthodox Jews, Black progressive Jews, how are they interacting and connecting?
So like for the congregation in Philadelphia, which is the spiritual leader for that is Rabbi Deborah Bowen, who's amazing, and the history of that synagogue, if you go to it, is amazing. For the longest time, they couldn't even pay to get Sederim or kosher food. So they created their own system where they, can get their own kosher food. But can you imagine? They could not purchase Sederim from Jewish publications back in the day. They had to have a conservative rabbi step in to help facilitate that. And now they are sort of recognized in the larger sort of scheme of things. But they, if you're in Philadelphia, and you have an opportunity to go visit them, they're great. And I've talked, especially in just the role of rabbi, I've talked to a Black Chabad rabbi. I've talked to rabbis across denomination and a cantor and a Kohenet, and all of them Black and brown. And we're all talking about the same stuff and the same challenge, some of the same challenges related to racism.
Yeah, and I will add, I'm sure that the Orthodox rabbi from Muncie is, I'm guessing, I could be wrong, but Rabbi Isaiah Rothstein, who works for Jewish Federations of North America. He is a dear colleague of both Sandra and myself. And there's other people doing anti-racism work in Orthodox spaces who are Black, just off the top of my head, I'm going to miss people. There's Chava Shervington, there's Sheis Rishon, also known as Manish Tana, and we all have, I would say, warm relationships and come together at various times in various ways across denominational lines. And, I think we all sort of recognize that we're facing similar challenges and similar opportunities. And it's really a wonderful moment to be able to make those connections.
I'm going to jump in. Akeda has raised in the chat a concern that it's directed at me, asking why we were centering anti-Semitism, which I think the conversation was, I was responding to some questions that were in the chat. I hope I did not spend too much time on the intersections or tension between anti-Semitism and racism. We have talked less about Juneteenth than we might have expected. We did spend most of our time talking about racism and racial justice across the Jewish world as we did Bill this says, but I do want to close by bringing us back to this holiday and asking you to reflect a little bit. And we've had a really, I think, really very powerful and moving conversation, particularly the way you both have shared and explained what it feels like to sit in this conversation as a Black and Jewish leader, and in this conversation and in many other conversations. So I thank you for that. But I want to just invite you to kind of bring us back to Juneteenth and to the meaning of this holiday, which as Robin Washington, our editor-in-large, has pointed out, is not marking the end of slavery. That slavery had long since ended. It really is about, and I'm going to share his column in the chat in a minute, but it is about how the troops came to force the slave owners in Galveston, Texas, to give up slavery too late. But to talk to us, each of you, just let's bring us back to that holiday and to reflecting on kind of how you're coming to it this year in 2022 after, you know, you live in this work. So talk to us about the holiday a little bit. Tema, you want to go first, and then Rabbi Sandra?
Yeah, I'm just thinking back to a piece that I wrote for the Forward a few years ago on Juneteenth, before we started doing these talks. And if I remember correctly, because it is a while since I wrote it, I said at the time that Juneteenth was not actually a holiday celebrating freedom. Juneteenth was a holiday celebrating the possibility of freedom. And so for me, when we think about, you have to ignore the headline of it, because the headline is that it marked the end of slavery. Not totally historically accurate. Headlines are meant to grab your attention, and then you read the article where it says that's not quite what happened. But you know, when I think about it, for me, it's about thinking about the racial justice work that I try to do every single day. Because freedom is unfolding, democracy is unfolding. I mean that in like we are in progress, and I also, unfortunately, at this moment, mean that in the falling apart way. So these are two things that are happening at the same time, and I am really, really, really excited to see to do some of that work. And I just saw somebody put in the chat that Sudbury, Massachusetts, is celebrating with a family picnic, which is part of ADL's Act Against Anti-Semitism, ADL and URJ's Act Against Anti-Semitism cohort. So I'm very, very excited to see that appear in the chat. So for me, it's, and you know, also thinking about what was this conversation about, this to me was Juneteenth. This was having a conversation about all the racial justice work that we do from between year to year, and that really the moment of Juneteenth gives us an opportunity to shed a light on the ongoing struggle and on the intersection, because I live at the intersection of anti-Black racism and anti-Semitism every day. And those struggles are not unrelated for me in any way, shape, or form. So for me, you know, I can't tell you, I told you what I do for Juneteenth, but I also hope that that clarifies like why I think that actually the conversation we've just had over the last hour or so is a Juneteenth conversation, even if it wasn't specifically about Juneteenth the whole time.
Yeah, yeah. Tema, what you said about your essay and talking about possibilities, I can't remember how exactly you said, but the fact that I am going to go to a southern city, a former Confederate state, and with my Black Jewish self, with another Black Jewish future rabbi and Black Jewish leaders, are leading services in a space for us by us, is liberating. There'd be a white dude there, but you know, he's an ally. But he's helping and taking a back seat. He's not organizing, he's supporting as a leader in the Jewish community in Atlanta. But this is groundbreaking. This is liberating, and I hope it is the beginning of possibilities for other spaces like this.
Thank you so much, both of you. And I just put in the chat, each of you had written pieces for us before I was here about Juneteenth, and Robin's recent column also about the myths and facts about it. I put in the chat also, if you are involved in an event relating to Juneteenth that you'd like to share with broader audiences, especially if they're virtual, please send them. I put the address in the chat, malcolm@forward.com. Appreciate so much, both of you, the work that you do with the Forward to support the Forward and across our communities. It's so important. And the way in which you lead with your whole selves is just really inspiring. So thank you for being with me today and being with our audience. I really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody in the audience and for your great questions and comments. And I really appreciate you being here. And I hope you will, if you all probably are connected to the Forward's newsletters. If you're not, you should sign up. You'll get an email tomorrow with all the relevant links. And I hope everybody has a peaceful and reflective and meaningful Juneteenth, free of violence and racism.